Hey, good morning or afternoon, everyone. This is Mark Hamblin here, and today we're going to spend a little bit of time on our Import Export PowerTool and go through how you can use that to, sort of improve your efficiencies when you're doing imports or exports and other things. We're going to focus, of course, today on the PowerTool, the Import Export PowerTool. So, what is it? It is basically a data migration tool. So it's not an integration tool. It's not going to replace, the cloud migration tool from Microsoft or things like that. It may augment that to a large extent, but it's basically an import export tool with some additional capabilities. So very much like RapidStart, but in a lot of ways much easier to use and much better, much faster as well. So very fast import export operations and very flexible because it just generates a text file that you can open up in Excel or edit in a text editor. And you don't have to go into Business Central and define all the things you need to do, like in a configuration package, all the fields and things like that. You just plug them into the text file and it knows what you're doing and reads them in. And then a couple of other things that it can do is it can actually delete and modify data within Business Central. And that's extremely handy. If you're a consultant and you've got an error message, maybe it's a reservation entry that's bad or something like that, you can use a power tool to delete that entry or to modify it and all those sorts of things without getting a developer involved, without having to try and export the data and manipulate it, then import it. Right from the power tool, you can make those changes. And that's extremely handy when we're talking about tables that don't necessarily have a user interface within Business Central, or some of the fields are marked as read-only within Business Central. You're able to do those sorts of modifications right from the power tool. And then the last point here, we do have published events for it that you can go to our knowledge base for, and functions you can call within it. So if you want to extend it, like there was a question, hey, can I schedule the imports? Sure. I mean, you'd have to write a little extension to do that, but you can use this thing to do almost anything you like. Custom data, scheduling things, running stuff in batch, whatever you want to do. It's very extensible. All right. Now, so with that, who should use this tool? So really, we'll start at the bottom here. It's really meant for integrators, maybe power users, consultants, that type of person. And the reason is, it's very powerful and very scary in air quotes, right? The big, warning sign here is an indicator that because it can do any data within the system. And that includes the protected tables like item ledger entries, customer ledger entries, detailed customer ledger, or any of those sort of sub ledgers and things like that. It can go and delete and modify data in those tables. Okay, so that's scary. You don't want your end users going in there and deleting all your item ledger entries, as an example. Now, to mitigate that a little, this is based on the built-in Business Central access to those tables. So we're not going to say, an end user can grab this thing and go and delete a bunch of customers if they don't have the permissions to delete customer records, as an example. And you can also limit whether they have access to protected tables or not. So there are two different permission sets within the system. One allows you to configure whether people can get at those sort of ledger entry tables or not. And by the way, I mentioned subledger tables like item ledger entry. The current version does not support GL entries. We've gotten a ton of requests on that, so we may allow people to also manipulate GL entries, but for now the GL entries are locked. But anyway, what we're doing now is giving the consultant or the power user, like integrator, consultant, power user, developer, really developer level access to the system. So developer, all the things that I've mentioned here, anybody that has the ability to publish an extension into Business Central could do this, right? If you've got the right permissions in Business Central, I can spend 5 minutes on ChatGPT, create an extension to delete all my item ledger entries, and I'm done. So we're not doing anything more than what you can do already based on your existing access within Business Central. We're just making it a lot easier for you to do that. And it also has the ability to disable the changelog temporarily, which again, you may not want to allow people to do, but it is handy if I'm updating 10,000 customers with something. I may not want those 10,000 changelog entries for that operation. Okay, so we have all of those sets. So again, really meant for the power users, the people that kind of know what they're doing, typically consultants, integrators, or power users at an end user facility. All right, now let's talk about the various actions that we can perform within this. So the first one we'll talk about is export. So it'll go through, and the nice thing about it is I can export any number of tables to a single text file. So I can put 20 tables in one text file. I can open up that text file in Excel or a text editor, edit the heck out of it, or add fields, remove fields, whatever the heck I want to do, and then suck that data back in one shot. So rather than like the configuration packages where you get an Excel file, great, but I got a different sheet for every table and things like that. It's a bit of a pain. This makes life a lot easier. And of course, RapidStart, I can't just randomly add new fields and do things like that. We can use configuration packages when we do exports as well. So what that means is if you have existing configuration packages and you want to use those to do imports and exports, you can use those definitions. The Import Export PowerTool will use those configuration package definitions to export that data. The other nice thing it can do on export is it can export notes and links. And this is handy if you're going from like, a different system, where they've got notes on master data or links and things like that. Well, I can export and import those links and record notes using the Power Tool. And I mentioned before, you can, if you want to do custom processing, like, specific types of media imports, things like that, you can extend the solution to do that. And one of the things I'll mention, I won't show it in this one. We do have an online video, I think, that shows it. But there's we do have a nav report that you can run in nav to export all your nav data, and then you can just take that text file that's generated and suck it into Business Central. Okay, not a replacement for the migration tools that Microsoft offers, but a very quick and easy way to see your nav data within Business Central. All right, so let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to go in and give you a quick overview of how this thing works. Now I've bookmarked it here, but if you're looking for it, you start out with I'm powerful, you search for it, and you find the Import Export Power Tool. Now the first time you come into this, I've been in here once already, but the first time you come in, it's going to go into setup and ask you to set these. Now the only way you're allowed to edit the setup is if you have the manager role defined, or if you're a super user. End users that are just set up as Import Export Power Tool end users won't be able to edit this. And just for fun, let's go in and I'll just quickly show you what that looks like. So there's two permission sets. The manager has the ability to edit the settings. The user does not. Okay, and the reason you want that is because when you come into the settings here, this is where we allow people to get access to those protected tables, like the ledger entry tables and things like that, and allow access to disable to changelog. This enhanced confirm, what this does is allows us to provide an additional prompt for people to confirm the operation they're performing, so that they maybe give it a little bit of thought before they go in and do it, right? All right, so anyway, that's the setup. After you've got that set up, I'm in the export here, and these are all the different options that we have. We're going to start with export. And what you can do with the export is I can come in, and again, I can select a configuration package here to use as my template for that export. And if I'm just going to go into one of these guys here. So I can choose this. We'll go into this configuration package. And this one here is the extended demo data from Microsoft. So it's got a ton of tables, a fair amount of data within this. And so I could come into this configuration package and I could select a specific table and then export that using the Power Tool to a file. Or up at the top, I can export this entire package to a text file. So again, I can do it right from here, or I can do it from the Import Export Power Tool. If I just do it from here real quick, again, it prompts me, do I want to do it? If I say yes, it's going to go through all those tables. It's going to generate one text file with all of that data in it. And, if you've been using BC, running in BC for a while, it'll be pretty quick because all this data will be cached and everything else. If it's the first time here, like I've done it, it's taken a little longer. Like if I ran this export again, it's probably going to take 3 or 4 seconds to do. But 14 seconds for 27,000 records and 400 tables is not bad, right? So if I open up that text file, what we see here, I've got this opening up in Notepad++. And that's what I generally suggest you use. There's another one called TextPad I like. The Notepad++ is free. And, if you try and open, large files within Notepad, it's going to die. So, something like Notepad++ is a better option. And what we've got here is, all the tables. So it's got, this table, here's all the data for that table, and here's, you know, all the other tables associated with it. And you'll notice this can be kind of hard to read and edit because this is all tabs between these, and you know, the columns don't line up. So what you may want to do is open this up in Excel instead. And there's a couple of ways. I could just open up this file in Excel, or I can copy and paste all of this data into Excel as well. The reason I had it open up here in the text editor is I wanted to, you know, cover off a couple of things that people have asked about over the last little while. And one of them is the formatting that's used. So you see here, if I hit this button, it's like the same thing you see in Word, where it shows me the sort of non-printable characters. We can see the CRLF, that's sort of the MS-DOS line end or line termination characters. If you see just an LF there, that means it may not import properly, right? You kind of need that CRLF. So if I open this up in Excel and save it, I'll always get the CRLF. But that's one thing to look at, is if you don't see the carriage return line feed character, it's probably not going to import properly. And then, you know, these are the tab characters and things like that. So by doing this in the text editor, you can kind of see the invisible characters and make sure you've got the right line terminators. That's really rare. You know, if I export this data, I can now suck in this file into Business Central and it'll suck it in, no problem. All right, so that's one export file there. Now, another thing we can do on that export, as I mentioned, is now I can choose a specific table to export or a filter here and export, you know, record notes and record links and things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a filter in there, everything up to table 39, and I'm going to see what, you know, links and notes we have associated with those tables. So and by the way, you can, you know, come in here and choose a specific table and all that kind of stuff, or type the table name, that sort of thing. But if I do this export data, it's going to go through all those tables. It's going to find all the record links, record notes, and then dump them out into a file for me. And it might be taking a little longer here because earlier I had some notes and links locked, but it's going to go through and find all the record links, all the record notes, and export those for me. So yeah, it was taking its time there. So what I'll do is I'll just show you what the result of that would be. So let's open up this guy. So this is on an item card, and what you see here, this is how it would have exported, and I'll just hide this. This is how it would have exported with, you know, it's the item table, and we've got, you know, the item number, and then we've got a note, and then we've got a link. And these three characters here means it's a new line in the note. So I'm going to import this in a little bit, and you can kind of see how it creates a multi-line note. So as long as you can export your notes from an existing system and replace the carriage returns with these three dashes, or three greater than signs, I should say, it'll import it. Now again, this is kind of hard to read, right? Like it's kind of hard to figure out what this is. So normally what we'd want to do, if you want to actually edit the data or review it and things like that, instead of doing it in the notepad, what we would do is go open in Excel or copy and paste this into Excel, same difference. And it's going to come in, and now we can kind of see it, you know, laid out properly. So this is the note, this is the link, and away we go. And the way it works when you import record notes and record links is, you know, we've got this primary key here, and, you know, that item is listed multiple times. So if you have multiple notes and links, that thing would just go all the way down. And then these special fields here that are defined to bring those notes or links in. So there's another one here as well on the sales order. I'll just show you what that looks like. We'll open it up in Excel. Same concept, where we've got, you know, the same sales order listed multiple times, and we're just creating record links on that specific sales order. And again, it can be any record within the system. We can import those links or notes. So I'll show you what that looks like. But these files that you're looking at here were both exported from the Import Export PowerTool, and this is what the format looks like. And then you can, again, go ahead and import those using the import functionality within the PowerTool. All right, so that's the basics of import and export, or sorry, export. Pretty simple. You choose a table or multiple tables. You can export notes or links, or you can export all the data from those tables as well. So pretty straightforward. Okay, now, so that's sort of the export side of it, right? Pretty simple. You choose a table or you choose a config package, hit export, and you get a text file that you can open up in a text editor, or you can open up in Excel, and away you go. So the next one we'll talk about is the import side. So now we can import, again, any table, including the subledgers and things like that. If you want to import, sort of the subledger stuff, you do need to enable that in the setup, that you have access to the protected tables. Otherwise, it's just going to skip that table entirely, not import it at all. As I mentioned earlier, in that text file, I can create a text file with any fields I want in it, randomly pick what I want, add, remove fields, don't have to go into a config package and deal with it or anything else, and just suck it in. A couple other little goodies that you can do. Where this is often used is when you're, spinning up a new environment and you need to import sort of opening balances and things like that. So one of the nice things is you can import the lot and serial numbers to an item journal. Like quite often you're coming from one system to another and you need all those lot numbers and serial numbers. Well, yeah, I can suck those in automatically using the Import Export PowerTool. It'll create all the appropriate entries and away you go. We also already talked about notes and links. And again, ledger entries. And I'm going to show you this as well, because this allows us to go in and bring in things like sales history. Now, typically when people bring in sales history, what they want to do is they bring it all in as journal entries and post those journal entries and then have to zero out the GL entries and all that kind of stuff. Well, with the Power Tool, you don't have to do any of that. I'll show you a way you can bring in, old entries like historical data without having to bring in journals and posts and all that kind of stuff. All right, and a few other things here, and again, the events, if you want to bring in like blobs, like files that you want to bring in as attachments, things like that, that's where you would extend it yourself with those events that are published. All right, so let's actually have a look at how we do imports. I'll show you a couple of quick examples here. So actually, the first one I'm going to show you is I will actually show you, that item journal import that I just mentioned. So here I've got, a file. Come on, open it. And what it's going to do is it's coming into the item journal line. And up at the top, we've got all the fields that we want to fill in. And you can use an export to actually, generate the file format you need. But really all you need is this table ID up at the top, and that can be a table name or a number. So that could have been, table 83 or whatever it is, 81 or 83, something like that, or the name. And then what we need is really, sort of the primary key fields to be able to insert, and then all the other fields that we might need. Now, so this is the file that I'm going to be importing, and you'll notice we've got, a bunch of items here, and we've got this serial number column. So the serial number column is going to bring in all of these serial numbers. And if I had lot numbers, I would just come in and add in the lot number field and the expiry date field and all that kind of stuff. And if I entered information in here, it would import that as well at the same time. Okay, so that's basically what we're going to do. We're going to bring this in. And you'll notice here on the quantity, we've got a star in front of the quantity, and we've got a star in front of the item number field. And you'll see in a sec, what that means is we're going to validate that information. So the idea behind that is, none of these other fields, we're not going to run any additional business logic when we bring in these additional fields here. The only time we run the built-in Business Central business logic is when we have a star on it. So the idea behind this is, what you want to do is think about how you would type this data into an item journal or any screen within Business Central. I type in the item number and I type in the quantity. Most of the rest of the stuff would probably default in, and of course the serial number. But anything that I would normally manually type in, you may want to validate that because it runs the underlying business logic for that field. So for example, when I type in an item number, the underlying business logic brings in the description, brings in the unit of measure, brings in all of those sorts of things. If we validate that on import, it's going to run that same logic and fill in all of those fields for us automatically, so we don't actually have to import those fields. So you see there's no unit of measure. I mean, if you needed an alternate unit of measure, you'd list it here, but we don't have to import the base unit of measure. We don't have to import the description, any of those sorts of things, because we're validating it. It's going to bring it in automatically. All right, so that's the file I'm going to use initially to to import an item journal. So we go into the Power Tool here, and I'm going to go to import. And here we've got a few different things that we can do. So let's talk about these options real quick before I run the import. So obviously we want to import data and insert that data, but I could also just say, you know what, I'm going to import existing records and only update. And if it finds a record that doesn't live in Business Central already, it's going to give me an error message and saying, I don't have that record to update. You can't import that record, right? For the current example, I'm going to be doing the import into the item journal. This two-step insert, that's kind of the default. And you know, there's no harm in doing that. It slows things down a little, because what this does, if you have that enabled, is it first inserts the record with just the primary keys. So let's say I'm importing a customer record or a bunch of customer records. It'll sort the record with just the customer number, and then it'll do an update to update the remaining fields on that now existing record. Okay, so that's very handy in a lot of cases. So in some cases within Business Central, it needs that functionality enabled, otherwise it won't import properly, right? Because when we actually insert the record, it goes and makes a bunch of changes to the fields that were in your import, and now your fields didn't import properly. So sometimes you need to turn this on. For the item journal import, I'm going to leave that off because I know I don't need it. But if you leave this off by default, you import it and your results aren't, you know, what you expected, turn that on and you're good to go. Like I said, this slows things down a little because it does two operations. It does an insert, then it does an update. With this turned off, it just does the insert, okay? Down here is that validation. So I can validate all fields, which means every field I import runs the underlying Business Central business logic. You typically don't want to do that. You typically want to, you know, again, mark any fields for validation that you would normally have to manually type in. Anything that you manually type in into the user interface when you're bringing in data, you'd want to set up to be validated. And again, if you run an import and it doesn't work the way you expect, you can switch it and have it validate all fields, and away you go and get better results. This field delimiters, quite often, I mean, this is not that, you know, common, but quite often if you're exporting something, bringing it into Excel and then saving it, Excel is going to add a bunch of quotes and stuff around some of those fields. So what this will allow you to do is the system will automatically remove those quotes if it detects the fact that you've got extraneous quotes within the data, right? So like in a description that has a comma in it or something like that, Excel is going to put extra quotes around that. Well, this will strip those quotes from that data automatically. Okay, over here, if I have missing fields or tables, it's going to prompt me. So in other words, if I've got an import and I've got a field, I typed a field in there that doesn't exist in Business Central, or I exported it from Nav, and now I'm bringing it into Business Central and it doesn't exist, it'll just pop up and say, hey, that field doesn't exist. Do you want to continue? And I can cancel the import at that point, or I can just ignore any missing fields, which is great, right? Because if I have, you know, a table in Nav that's got a whole bunch of custom fields, I can export that in Nav, suck it in here. If I don't have those custom fields in BC, it'll just ignore them and import the core data. And that's great for, you know, doing demos or proof of concepts using Nav data or other systems data within BC. Or I can have it error out and just prevent me from importing if the fields don't exist within BC. These guys down here, again, more business logic validation. So the idea behind this, the on insert trigger, after I insert a record, this will run any additional business logic to, you know, update the data or update alternate data, those types of things. So quite often when you're doing inserts, it's worth having that turned on. And same thing with updates when you're modifying, like allowing record updates. You probably want to turn that on, you know, to run that underlying business logic. But again, you know, you can give it a shot. If it's not working the way you expect, you can turn these on or off. And of course, disabling the change log I mentioned earlier. And then finally, the text encoding. You know, typical one is UTF-8. Those are the two. UTF-8 gives you the sort of international characters and things like that. Otherwise, MS-DOS is kind of fine as well. All right. And by the way, if I export something from you know, an external system like NetSuite or something like that, it's likely going to save that as UTF-8. And in those text editors, like that Notepad++ I mentioned, you can actually check what the encoding is. So it'll tell you if it's UTF-8 or ANSI, which is MS-DOS. But typically, it's going to be UTF-8 if you're exporting from an external system. All right. Anyway, those are the details. Like typically, not much you have to modify on here. I'm going to do the record inserts. I'm going to do the import data. we're going to come in, we're going to grab that item journal that I had before. It's going to grab it. And by the way, I think I had, what did I have, 500, 1,000 lines on that. So it's going to go through, and now I got to find something to talk about for 20 seconds or something like that as it's doing the import. But what it's doing here while it's importing is it's creating those item journal lines. And again, as you know, in Business Central, the first time you do a new operation for the first time, it takes a little longer. So if I'm doing this, you know, a second time, if I did that same import a second time, it's probably going to take like 10 seconds, right? Because this is the first time I did it. It takes a while for it to cache the data and the code and everything else. But it took 25 seconds to import those 1,000 records. Typically, it's a lot shorter than that, right? Normally, when I do this, it's, you know, 10, 15 seconds for 1,000 records. But even this isn't bad because this is a linear time for the most part, which means that if I had 10,000 records here, it would be about 10 times the amount of time. So it'd be 250 seconds, right? So less than 5 minutes to import 10,000 records. And again, typically it's going to be a couple of minutes. We're not talking about 5 minutes to import 10,000 records. It's just this is the first time I did it. So very fast to do those imports. And then, of course, to see what it actually did when it did that import, let's go into the item journals. And I said import into the import batch. Here's all the data that's imported, those 5 or 1,000 lines. And then, of course, each line had a serial number associated with it. So it brought in the serial number and everything appropriately. And as I mentioned, if you had a lot number expiration date, it would have brought those in as well. So that's an easy way to bring in your serial numbers, lot numbers, those sorts of things. And you'll notice actually when I go in here, now as of Business Central 22, I believe, they have this option as well, item tracking on lines. If you've got that enabled like I did for this, what that also allows you to do is import, without using the Import Export PowerTool, that serial number or lot number right onto the line itself. And you know, in that case, you probably don't actually need to use the Import Export PowerTool to bring in serial numbers, lot numbers. It'd just be way, way slower, right? So anyway, that's what this thing does. And because I opened up that serial number page, it now lists it on here. But all of these guys do have the appropriate serial number brought in automatically based on that Import Export PowerTool. All right, so again, this is how I'd want to bring in opening balances, right? I'm going to bring in the opening balance for all of these individual items and serial numbers and everything else. I'm going to post this journal and I'm good to go. But if I want to bring in history, I don't necessarily want to do that. Now, again, a lot of people, when they're bringing in history, they bring it into the item journal and they post it to get the ledger entries. That generates GL entries and value entries and a whole bunch of stuff. And that's kind of ugly. What I want to do is I want to bring in you know, sales history for this particular customer without having to do all of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to show you how to do that. This is going to take a little longer and I'm going to run out of time for sure, but I'm going to show you this because it's kind of interesting. We get this question a lot. So the first thing I'm going to do actually is I'm going to import a bunch of items. So if I go in here into my item list, come on, wiki. All right. Now, I've got a bunch of the standard items, but if I look, you know, in this range here, I've got no items in sort of that 9 million range or whatever I'm going to bring in. So first I'm going to import the items for this particular customer. So we're going to import a whole bunch of new items. So what I'm going to do is come in here, hit import data, and the items that I'm going to bring in, I'll just open it up here. I'll open it up in the text editor. So it's just, you know, starting with 9. And I've got 500 items that I'm going to bring in, okay? So I'm going to bring in 500 items. There's very little information. I've got the item number, description, some posting groups, and that's basically what I'm going to bring into the system. So we're going to grab that guy. We're going to bring in those items. And by the way, in this particular case, I would have normally turned off that, you know, run the on insert trigger because I actually don't need it. I know just based on the way the code looks that I don't actually need this. With that on, it takes a little more time to run, but it still took 6 seconds to import those items. So if we go back and look at those items now, wiki, all right. And we look now, as soon as BC wakes up, come on. Okay, so we look now, we've got all of these items that we just brought in, and they're valid items. Oh, and one of the things I should mention is, you know, I brought in that unit of measure and everything else. I didn't have to go in and set the subtable or anything like that. it's come in and it's set the appropriate unit of measure, and it's created the item units of measure information and everything automatically, right? So it was very simple. I imported like 4 fields, and I got everything I need to make this a valid item that I can use like right now if I want. And of course, it didn't bring in any history. Everything's 0. I've got no history, but again, I want sales history for all these items that I just brought in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import that sales history, but we're going to prep it first. So I'm going to show you a few tricks for prepping that sales history. So the first thing is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up this, this item history. So this is all my individual transactions for all of those different items by day, right? So if I scroll down here, you can see, over the 12 months of 2023, this is all my sales history. And we happen to have, about 1 million records in this file, right? So 999,000 records in this file. This is what we're going to import. But I don't want this level of detail. I want monthly history. So I just want to, consolidate this as a monthly history import. So I'm going to show you a couple of tricks to do that. Now, normally what I would do is I would just, bring this stuff into SQL Server, run a quick query, and it'll dump out the format, the file exactly the way you need it. But I'm going to do it in Excel just in case you don't have access to SQL or whatever. So I'm opening up that same data in Excel now, those 1 million records. So it takes, Excel chugs along for a little bit here as it opens. We're going to bring in those 1 million records. And while we're waiting, there's a question, is there a size limit on any of these files? No. I think once you hit, is it 50 meg, or they may have bumped it, might be 100 meg now. You have issues importing those files, but a 50 meg file will import no problem with 1 million records or whatever you like. This file that I'm opening here, I actually have imported raw as 1 million records, 1 million item ledger entries, no problem. Took, I can't remember how many minutes, several minutes to import, but it brought it in no problem. All right, so here we go. We've got this open in Excel. Here's my roughly 1 million records, based on individual dates. And what I did was I just came in and I created a formula here to show me, the month. So this is grouping all of the individual dates by month. And what I did was I just used the first of the month. I'm going to set my history as of the first of the month for every month, just so I don't have to worry about if there's 29 days or 31 days in a month. Everything just comes in as of the first of the month. Now, this is great, but again, I want to summarize by month. I want to sum up all the sales for this particular item by month. So how do you do that? Well, what we do is use a pivot table. Again, if you're using this in SQL, it's a quick query, and it gives you everything you need, and you export that file, and you're good to go. But I'm going to do it in Excel here, and I'm going to create a pivot table just because I'm going to show you some tricks in Excel for doing this. So here's our pivot table. And what we're going to do is, of course, item number and quantity here. And there's our total sales for this particular item, but it's not by month. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop this in and see it by month as well. So now I've got item number by month, and maybe you also want it by location code just for fun. So here I've got it item number, month, location code. And what I'm going to do while I'm here is I'm just going to not subtotal that. Now this is great, except I can't export this into a flat text file the way I want to do it, right? Like this is not that useful for me. It breaks out, my sales by month for all this, and great, but it's not useful. So here's a few tricks you can use within Excel. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into pivot table options, and if I go to the display here, one of the options, and hopefully you guys are seeing this on your end, it looks like you are, is this classic pivot table layout. So if I do that, magically now what happens is I've got, item number, date, location, and quantity. So now I've got this in a flat format that I could actually use, right? This is the format that my file needs to import this data. But we're missing, this stuff here. So here's another little quick trick you can use. If I go in here and I do field settings, if you go to layout and print, I just repeat the item labels, and guess what? Now I've got pretty much the exact file I need to, import in here. I just come in and select all this data, and I can import it. And that's what I've done. I've actually come in with the magic of copy and paste and a few little tricks, because your sales history needs to be negative. What I did was I took the total, like if we look at this, I took the total. This is a key point. This needs to be my opening balance, because this is my opening balance, and then this is going to draw down on that opening balance. So at the end of this import, I'm going to be left with a quantity of 0 in stock. So again, with the magic of copy and paste, what I did there was I grabbed that total, that's it here, and then if we scroll down a whole bunch, we get to the transactions. So all the transactions now are negative. So this item, this month, this is my sales quantity. And if I find that item in the next month, it's going to have a sales quantity and everything else. So this is the actual file I'm going to use. I'm going to basically copy and paste this into a text file, or save this as a text file, and I'm good to go. And so what that ends up looking like after I do that is this. So if you don't know what table 32 is, that's my item ledger entry table. And I could have put in item ledger entry in here if I like as a description. So what I've got is the entry number is the item ledger entry number. Now I started at 1,000 because I've got existing item ledger entries, but if this is a brand new system, you'd start at 1 and go up. And I just generated these in Excel. Of course, I opened this up in Excel and just had it generate this stuff down. And here you can see it's going to bring in my opening balance of 48,000, and then all of these guys below it are going to draw down on that 48,000, and this will add up to 0 at the end. And I added a couple of other things, right? So I've got, my quantity. I've got the invoiced quantity as well. So I should have opened this up in Excel, but I've got invoiced quantity, and of course the remaining quantity is going to be 0. So let's actually see what this looks like. Now I stripped this down. It resulted in about 6,000 records in total. I cut it down a little just to increase the import speed. And what we're going to do is just go import data. We're going to come in and we're going to grab the opening balance data for that. And again, what we're doing here is we're sucking this directly into the item ledger entries. There's no posting required, which means there's no impact to the GL. There's no value entries. There's none of that stuff that gets generated. But we get that sales history, right? So now if I open up the items, give it a sec to load here, and we go in and look at our item numbers that we imported previously, right? We're still all 0, but if I open any of these guys up, we've now got that full sales history for those items in the system, right? So in reverse order, because the default sort order is by entry number, but here we've got our opening balance 50,000, and then all our sales month by month until we get basically down to 0. So that is how you can import. And this goes for anything. I mean, item ledger entries are pretty typical, but I went from 1 million records down to 6,000 records, takes like 30 seconds to import. And now I've got my monthly sales history. And quite often people will also break this down by customer. Same process. Now I've got my monthly sales history by item and customer and location. Very easy to do. And the PowerTool makes that very simple, right? The prep for it, again, SQL Server is easier, but if you want to use Excel, those are some tips and tricks in Excel you can use to do that import. Now, while I'm here, just for fun, because I said I would, I'm going to we'll just bring in the sales order stuff. So what I did was brought this in. Oh yeah, what I want to do is I want to update, because it's going to try and do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import those record links, and I forgot to change my settings, and it gave me a nice error saying you can't do that. So I'm going to update the records because I'm bringing in record links. And I'm not going to, run any triggers because we don't need it. We're just bringing in the record links. And so we're going to bring in those sales order record links. That's going to come in, imported those. And now if we look at this guy here, easier way, if you search the company data, sometimes that's a quicker way of doing it, except I didn't know I lied. All right, let's go with the sales orders. I couldn't remember the actual sales order number that I used. I think it was 1. We'll find it here as soon as everything loads. And, all right, so there it is. There's the links that I imported using that import, right? So just these links that you saw earlier in the thing. And again, I could have brought in notes and all that kind of stuff as well. Let's talk about update. So again, we can update any field in any table. including non-editable fields, protected fields, all of that kind of stuff, which makes it very easy to do sort of a search and replace. And this is handy if it's a field you can't edit in Excel or it's hard to export and manipulate and import. So that update makes it pretty nice for fixing quick data issues or quickly fixing data issues. And it's really straightforward. It's exactly what you'd expect. I'll come in here and, just for fun, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to choose the customer, and I'm going to update the email address, because let's just do this. I'm going to update the email address because this is a demo system. I don't want to accidentally email real people. I'm going to come in and put in, my email at, server dot, whatever. Probably should be careful with that. Maybe somebody has that email address. Anyway, I'm going to do that, and then you can actually come in and set a filter, and I can say, only update, oops, I spelled that wrong. Only update, the records that have the US country code. So when I've got that, if I hit update now, it's going to run that update on this customer with that filter, and it's going to set the field value to this. If I want to see which records are going to be affected, I can click on this, and what it will do is it'll ask me if I want to show the formatted filter data. And what that is based on the filter I've specified, it'll show me exactly which records are going to be edited, or I can show just the raw table data in a new tab. And this would be what happens if you're going against a table that doesn't have a corresponding user interface within Business Central, so like reservation entries or things like that. But I'm going to open this up, and what it'll do is it shows me it's only these two customers that have that country code. These are the ones that are going to be updated with the new email address. And again, if I change that filter, it's going to show me different records. But then it's simple. I just say, update. This, by the way, is the enhanced confirmation. So this is where, somebody has to actually type something in order to confirm that operation. So maybe that gives them a second to think about what they're doing before they actually, delete 10 million records or something like that. Final confirmation, this is going to update 2 records, yes, and like it's just done, it's instant, right? All right, delete, exactly the same thing. Like let's say I made a mistake doing that import of those item ledger entries, right? Didn't like it, didn't work properly, something went wrong, I want to redo it. How do I get rid of all those item ledger entries? Well, let's have a look. So I'm going to go into delete here, and we're going to do the item ledger entry. And what I'm going to do, I don't want to do all of them. I'm going to do it, well, I actually know because we started with entry number 1000. I'm going to delete, everything from entry number 1000 and newer. I could have done it by item number or posting date or whatever the heck I want, or you can add as many filters here as you want, but I'm just going to do it by entry number. And again, here I could come in and drill down and see what records are actually going to be deleted. But we'll just come in here, hit delete data, do the enhanced confirm. It says 1,495 records, which is the history that I imported, right? If you remember, it's not a million records, it's these guys, the summary. Hit OK, and guess what it's going to do? You'll never guess what it's going to do. It's going to delete 1,495 records, and that history is gone, and now I can re-import it properly or do whatever I want. And this is, again, why you don't want to give this necessarily to end users, because they're going to delete ledger entries that actually have value entries or GL entries and things like that, and you're going to end up with a mess. I can delete those because I know I don't have any other records that rely on those, and we're safe. Okay. All right. If you have any additional questions, go to our website. There are additional videos on Import Export PowerTool, including other tips and tricks in Excel for like importing, other types of data, demo data, things like that. You'll get a copy of this video, or parts of this video will be published as well on the website. And of course, there's connect with us on the website. If you go to our knowledge base, which you can find in the support area of the website, you can find Import Export PowerTool. It's got some info on there. It's got the events if you want to do any development with it, those sorts of things. Thanks, everyone. Hopefully we'll see you on the next webinars. Talk to you later.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more great content, and remember to hit that bell icon to stay updated. See you in the next video.